The blood ran slow down Silas Hawthorne's left arm, pooling in the creases of his palm before dripping onto the snow. He stood on the cabin porch, his right hand steady around the grip of his Colt smoke still rising from the barrel. Behind him, through the open door, firelight flickered against the darkness. Before him, 3 bodies lay scattered across the white ground like broken promises. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the smell of gunpowder and something older, something that smelled like vengeance finally served. From inside the cabin, a voice cut through the silence, steady now, though it had trembled just weeks ago. "Are there more coming?" Silas did not turn. His eyes scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for the glint of a rifle barrel, for the shadow that did not belong. "Drake got away," he said. "He'll be back, and next time he won't come with just 3 men." Footsteps behind him. Soft, careful, but no longer afraid. Clara Morgan stepped onto the porch, a Winchester rifle cradled in her arms like she had been born holding it. The same woman who 3 weeks ago had collapsed into his arms, more dead than alive. "Then we'll be ready," she said. Silas finally turned to look at her. In the pale moonlight, her face was set with determination that would have seemed impossible that first night, the night the storm brought her to his door. This is how it began. Not with gunfire and blood on snow, but with 3 desperate knocks in the middle of the worst blizzard Montana had seen in 20 years. 3 weeks earlier, the storm came down from the mountains without warning, the way death sometimes does. One moment the sky was gray but peaceful. The next, the world turned white with fury. Silas Hawthorne had lived 52 years on this earth, 15 of them alone on this mountain. He knew the weather like he knew the scars on his own hands. When the temperature dropped 30 degrees in an hour and the wind started screaming through the valley, he secured the horses, brought extra wood inside, and settled in to wait. The cabin was small but solid. He had built it himself after the old house burned. Oak and pine chinked tight against the cold, with a stone fireplace that could heat the entire space even in the worst winter. There was a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs that only ever held one, a small kitchen area, and shelves lined with books. More books than a mountain man should own, people said. But Silas had stopped caring what people said a long time ago. That night he sat by the fire with a book he had read 3 times before. The words were familiar, comfortable, like the weight of the rifle that hung within arm's reach. Outside the blizzard raged, inside the fire crackled, and for a few hours the world was as it should be. Then came the knocking. 3 sounds, weak and uneven. The kind of knock made by someone who has nothing left but refuses to die. Silas set the book down slowly. He did not rush to the door. Men who rushed in situations like this often found themselves dead. Instead, he stood, moved his hand to the pistol at his hip, and crossed to the window first. Nothing. Only white. The snow was falling so thick he could barely see 5 feet beyond the glass. The knock came again, fainter this time. He went to the door and opened it. She fell into his arms like a ghost made flesh. She was young, no more than 25. Her hair might have been brown, but it was so matted with ice and dirt that he could not be certain. Her clothes were torn, soaked through, frozen stiff in places. She wore no shoes. Her feet were blue, and on her wrists, circling the pale skin like bracelets of violence, were the deep purple grooves of rope that had bitten through to muscle. "Please." The word came out as a rasp, barely human. "Don't take me back to them." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went limp in his arms. Silas did not hesitate. He kicked the door shut behind him, carried her to the chair by the fire, and went to work. 15 years of living alone had taught him many things: how to set a broken bone, how to stitch a wound, how to recognize frostbite, and how to treat it before the rot set in. He stripped away her frozen clothes with clinical efficiency, wrapped her in blankets, elevated her feet, and began the slow process of warming her core temperature. She did not wake for 6 hours. During that time, Silas sat across from her and watched, not with concern, not with curiosity, with the careful attention of a man who had learned long ago that the world sends trouble in many forms, and sometimes the most dangerous comes wrapped in innocence. He studied the wounds on her wrists. These were not from a single binding. The skin was torn in layers, old wounds reopened and reopened again. This woman had been tied up many times, and she had fought to escape every single time. He looked at the bruises on her arms, her shoulders, her neck, the way she flinched in her unconscious state when the fire popped too loud, the scars that were old and the wounds that were new. Someone had hurt this woman, badly, repeatedly, and she had run from them into a storm that should have killed her, which meant whoever she was running from was worse than death. When she finally opened her eyes, they were the color of storm clouds, gray and blue and full of lightning. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply looked at him with the gaze of someone who has learned that showing fear only makes things worse. "Where am I?" "My cabin, 20 miles from Pine Ridge. You came to my door in the middle of the blizzard." She processed this information in silence. Her eyes moved around the room, cataloging exits, threats, weapons. Silas recognized the behavior. He had done the same thing himself once a long time ago. "Who are you?" she asked. "Silas Hawthorne." Something flickered in her eyes at the name. Recognition, maybe, or fear. He could not tell which. "Are you with them?" "I don't know who they are." "The men who—" She stopped, swallowed. "The men who had me." Silas shook his head slowly. "I don't know anything about you, miss. You knocked on my door. I let you in. That's all." She studied him for a long moment. The scar that ran from his temple to his cheek, the gray at his temples, the calloused hands and the weathered face, and the pistol that sat on the table within his reach. "You could have left me outside," she said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Silas considered the question. He thought about the easy answer, the simple one about common decency and Christian charity. But he had stopped believing in simple answers 15 years ago. "Because I've seen what happens to people who nobody helps," he said. "And I decided a long time ago I wouldn't be that kind of man." She kept watching him with those storm-colored eyes. Finally, something in her shoulders released. Not trust, not yet, but the acknowledgement that for the moment she was not in immediate danger. "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara Morgan." Silas nodded but did not speak. He had learned that silence often drew out more truth than questions. Clara's eyes went to the bandages on her wrists, then back to him. "I suppose you want to know what happened. Only if you want to tell it. If you're going to help me, you need to know who might come looking." Silas leaned back in his chair. "Then tell me." And she did. Clara Morgan had come to Montana on a promise. Her father, a minister in Boston, had died 6 months earlier. The consumption took him slowly, gave him time to worry about his daughter's future. He had arranged through a marriage broker for Clara to travel west and wed a merchant in Pine Ridge, a man named Harold Vance, who wrote letters full of gentle words and promises of a good life. "I had nothing left in Boston," Clara said. "No family, no money, no prospects. A woman alone in that city has 3 choices: service, sin, or starvation. So I took the train west." She paused, and Silas saw the first crack in her composure. The memory of what came next was harder to speak. "When I arrived, there was no Harold Vance. The man who met me at the station said Mr. Vance had been delayed, that I should come to his house and wait. I believed him. God help me, I believed him." Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The house belonged to a man named Cornelius Drake. Silas felt the name hit him like a fist to the chest. His expression did not change, but something inside him, something that had been sleeping for 15 years, woke up and began to burn. "Drake," he repeated. "You know him." "I know of him." His voice was carefully neutral. "He owns the gold mine outside Pine Ridge, half the town too, from what I hear." "More than half." Clara's voice turned bitter. "He owns everything, including the law, including the people who were supposed to protect me." She told him about the 3 weeks she spent locked in an attic room, about the meals slid under the door and the guards who watched her window, About the night she overheard Drake and his men talking in the room below, discussing land deals and forged documents and the names of people who had been handled. "My name was on that list," Clara said. "Listed as a witness to be eliminated. They were going to kill me after I signed some papers. I don't even know what they said. I never signed them." "How did you escape?" "The third night the guard who was supposed to watch me got drunk. I broke the window with a chair and climbed down the drain pipe, cut my hands to ribbons." She looked at the bandages on her wrists. "These aren't just from being tied. They're from tearing myself free." She had run into the storm with nothing. No coat, no shoes, no direction. She had simply run knowing that death in the blizzard was better than whatever Drake had planned for her. "How far did you run?" Silas asked. "I don't know. Hours. The snow was so thick I couldn't see. I just kept moving until I saw your light through the trees." Silas sat in silence, processing everything she had told him. Drake. The name circled in his mind like a vulture over carrion. Cornelius Drake, who had arrived in Montana 15 years ago with money and ambition and no conscience to speak of. 15 years ago. The same year Silas's wife and daughter died. "They'll come looking for you," he said finally. "Yes." "They'll find you eventually. The snow will stop and they'll track your path here." Clara nodded. "I know. I can leave as soon as the storm breaks. I don't want to bring trouble to you." Silas looked at her, at the bruises and the bandages and the fierce light in her storm-colored eyes, at the woman who had run barefoot through a blizzard rather than submit to the men who held her. "The storm won't break for at least 2 days," he said. "Maybe 3. After that, whoever comes looking will have to deal with me first." Clara stared at him. "Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Silas stood and walked to the window. The snow was still falling thick and white, covering the world in silence. 15 years ago, he said, not looking at her, men came to my home in the middle of the night. They burned it down. They killed my wife. They took my daughter. She was 8 years old. His voice did not waver, but Clara could hear the weight of every word. "I never found out who sent them. I never found my daughter. I've been living on this mountain ever since, waiting for answers that never came." He turned back to face her. The scar on his cheek seemed to glow in the firelight. "Drake's name was always whispered, always in the shadows, but I could never prove anything." His eyes met hers. "Now you show up on my doorstep telling me Drake is running forged documents and murder plots out of his house, telling me his men tied you up and planned to kill you." Clara understood then. She saw it in his eyes, the cold fire that had been waiting for fuel. "This isn't just about helping me," she said. "No, but that doesn't mean I won't help you." He walked to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the table near her, then retreated to his chair on the other side of the room. "Rest," he said. "Eat when you're hungry. The supplies are there." He nodded toward the small kitchen. "When the storm breaks, we'll figure out what to do next. But for now, you're safe here." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "How do you know you can trust me?" Silas almost smiled. "Almost. I don't. But I've learned to read people pretty well over the years. And you, Miss Morgan, are not a liar. You're a survivor. There's a difference." The storm raged for 2 more days. During that time, Clara slept more than she had in weeks. Real sleep, deep and dreamless, without the fear of waking to rough hands and cruel voices. She ate the simple meals Silas prepared, drank the strong coffee, let her body begin the slow process of healing. Silas gave her space. He slept in the chair by the fire, leaving the bed for her despite her protests. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were direct and honest. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He did not offer unwanted comfort. He simply existed beside her, solid and calm, like the mountain itself. On the second day she asked about the books. "You have more than I expected," she said, running her fingers along the spines. "Philosophy, history, poetry even." "My wife liked to read," Silas said. "After she died, I kept her collection, added to it over the years." "What was her name?" "Sarah." Clara heard the love in that single word, the loss that 15 years had not dulled. "And your daughter?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and went to a high shelf where a small wooden box sat covered in dust. He brought it down, opened it, and removed a faded photograph. He handed it to Clara. The image showed a woman with kind eyes and a little girl with amber-colored eyes like her father's. They were both smiling, caught in a moment of joy that the photograph had preserved even as the world destroyed everything else. "Lily," Silas said. Her name was Lily. She would be 23 now. Clara looked at the photograph at the little girl who never got to grow up and felt something break inside her chest. "I'm sorry," she said. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough, but it was all she had. Silas took the photograph back, looked at it for a moment longer, then returned it to the box. "The men who did it wore masks," he said, "but I killed 3 of them before they got away. The sheriff said it was probably bandits. Random violence, but nothing was stolen. They didn't want money or horses. They wanted my family dead and my land empty. Drake wanted your land. My property sits on the North Valley, the only piece of ground in 50 miles that he doesn't own. After Sarah and Lily," he paused. "After that night he offered to buy it, 3 separate times. I refused every time." Clara understood now why the name Cornelius Drake had hit Silas so hard, why a man who had lived alone for 15 years was suddenly willing to fight. This was not just about helping a stranger. This was about the answers Silas had been waiting for since the night his world burned. On the morning of the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. The sun rose over mountains covered in fresh snow, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The temperature was still brutal, but the wind had died, and for the first time in 3 days, the world was visible again. Silas was checking the horses when he heard it. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching. He did not run to the cabin. He walked calmly, but his hand was already on his pistol by the time he reached the porch. "Someone's coming," he said through the door. "Stay inside, stay quiet, get behind the bed, and don't come out until I tell you." He heard Clara move inside. She did not argue. Good. The rider appeared at the edge of the tree line 5 minutes later. A single horse, black as coal. The man on top wore a deputy's star on his chest. Roar Madsen. Silas knew him by reputation. Drake's man wearing a lawman's badge, the kind of corrupt that hid behind authority and smiled while it hurt people. Madsen rode up to the cabin and stopped about 20 feet from the porch. His hand rested casually on his thigh near his holster. "Morning, Hawthorne. Been a while." "Madsen? Cold one out here. Mind if I warm up inside?" "Yes." Madsen's smile did not falter. "Fair enough. I'm here on official business anyway. Sheriff's office is looking for a young woman. Brown hair, blue eyes. Went missing from town a few days ago. Folks are worried about her." "Haven't seen anyone?" "That's so." Madsen made a show of looking around. His eyes lingered on the snow near the cabin where Clara's footprints from 3 nights ago might still be visible beneath the fresh fall. "Funny. I could have sworn I saw tracks coming this way. Small ones. Woman's size. Storm covered a lot of tracks." "That it did." Madsen shifted in his saddle. "Thing is, Hawthorne, this particular woman is wanted for theft. Took some documents from Mr. Drake's office. Important papers. Mr. Drake is very concerned about their safe return." "I told you, I haven't seen anyone." Madsen's smile finally faded. He swung down from his horse and took a step toward the cabin. Then another. "I have the authority to search this property. You have a warrant? I have a badge. That's enough authority for me." He took another step, and then Silas moved. Later, Clara would not be able to describe exactly what happened. One moment Madsen was walking toward the cabin with his hand near his gun. The next he was flat on his back in the snow, his weapon 5 feet away, and Silas was standing over him with a look in his eyes that Clara had never seen before. Not anger, something colder, something that had been refined by 15 years of loss and solitude into something diamond hard and just as sharp. "A badge doesn't give you the right to enter a man's home without a warrant," Silas said. His voice was calm, conversational. Somehow that made it more frightening. "You want to search my cabin, you come back with proper papers. Until then, get off my land." Madsen scrambled to his feet, wiping blood from his lip where he had hit the ground. His eyes burned with humiliation and rage, but he was smart enough not to reach for his fallen gun. "You're making a mistake, old man." "Wouldn't be my first. Drake's not going to let this go." "I'm counting on it." Madsen backed toward his horse, keeping his eyes on Silas the whole time. When he mounted, he looked down with a smile that promised violence. "You know, Drake told me something interesting about your wife. Said he remembered her. Said she was real pretty." Every muscle in Silas's body went rigid. "We'll be back," Madsen said. "And next time we won't be asking politely." He turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the trees. Silas stood motionless until the hoofbeats faded entirely. Then he unclenched his fists and walked back to the cabin. Clara was waiting just inside the door, her face pale but her eyes fierce. "Drake," she said, "the man who had me imprisoned, and the man who killed my family." Silas's voice was like gravel. "It seems your enemies and mine are the same person, Miss Morgan." Clara felt the weight of this revelation settle over her like a physical thing. "What do we do now?" Silas walked to the window and looked out at the mountains that had been his prison and his refuge for 15 years, the mountains where he had buried his grief and his rage and his hope. "Now we find out the truth," he said, "all of it, and then we make Drake pay for every single thing he's done." Clara moved to stand beside him, not too close. She was not ready for that yet, but close enough to see the same view he saw, the same vast, indifferent wilderness that cared nothing for the small dramas of human beings. "They'll come back," she said, "with more men." "Yes. We can't fight them all." Silas finally looked at her, and for the first time Clara saw something in his eyes that was not just anger or determination. She saw hope. "No," he agreed, "not alone. But Drake has made a lot of enemies over the years. People who lost their land, their families, their lives to his schemes. They're scared now, but fear can turn to courage when someone shows them that Drake can bleed. And you're going to show them." Silas did not answer with words. He simply looked out at the mountains again, at the world that had taken everything from him, and then in the middle of a storm had sent him one chance at justice. Clara watched his profile, the scar that told his history, the gray at his temples that spoke of years of waiting, and she made a decision. "I'm not running anymore," she said. Silas turned to her. "They want to silence me because of what I know, what I saw in that house, the documents, the names, the proof of everything Drake has done." She met his eyes without flinching. "If I run, that proof dies with me. But if I stay, if I fight, maybe I can help bring him down." "You could die," Silas said bluntly. "I could have died in that blizzard. I didn't. Maybe there's a reason for that." Silas studied her for a long moment. The bruises that were fading, the bandages that covered healing wounds, the steel in her spine that no amount of abuse had been able to break. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. "Maybe both." And then something extraordinary happened. Silas Hawthorne, who had not smiled in 15 years, felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "Maybe both," he agreed. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the mountains. Inside, two people who had been strangers 3 days ago began to plan a war. The alliance had begun. 5 days had passed since Madsen's visit. 5 days of preparation, of planning, of watching the horizon for the dust cloud that would signal Drake's return. It never came, and that worried Silas more than any army would have. "He's waiting," Clara said on the morning of the 6th day. She stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the tree line the way Silas had taught her. "He knows we're expecting an attack, so he's not going to give us one." "Smart man." Silas was cleaning his rifle at the table, the movements automatic after decades of practice. Drake didn't build his empire by being predictable. "So what do we do?" Silas set down the rifle and looked at her. In the weeks since her arrival, Clara had transformed. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something fiercer. The trembling in her hands had steadied. She still flinched sometimes when a shadow moved wrong or a sound came too suddenly, but she no longer cowered. She was becoming a fighter. "We go to him," Silas said. Clara turned from the window. "What? Drake expects us to hide up here. Wait for his next move. If we do that, we're playing his game on his terms." Silas stood, walked to the small arsenal he kept on the wall. "We need information. We need allies. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. That means going to Pine Ridge." "That's suicide. The whole town is his." "Not the whole town. There are still good people in Pine Ridge. People Drake hasn't broken yet. People who remember what the town was before he came." Silas pulled on his coat, checked the pistol at his hip. "Thomas Brennan runs the general store. He's been there longer than anyone. He's no friend of Drake's." Clara set down her coffee. "And you think he'll help us?" "I think he'll want to. Whether he's brave enough to actually do it." Silas shrugged. "We'll find out." Clara moved toward the bedroom where her few possessions were stored. The coat Silas had given her, one of Sarah's old winter jackets that still carried a faint trace of lavender. The boots he had found in storage, slightly too large but functional. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No." "Yes." She turned to face him, her jaw set. "I've spent my whole life letting other people decide what happens to me. Where I go, who I marry, whether I live or die. That ends now. This isn't about deciding, Miss Morgan. This is about survival. Drake's men know your face. The moment you show up in Pine Ridge, someone will report it. Then let them report it." Clara pulled on the coat, buttoned it with hands that no longer shook. "I'm the one who knows what's in Drake's safe. I'm the one who overheard his plans. If you're going to convince anyone to help us, you'll need me there to tell them what we're fighting against." Silas studied her for a long moment. He saw the determination in her eyes, the absolute refusal to back down, and he recognized it because he had seen the same look in Sarah's eyes 100 times. Sarah, who had killed 2 men protecting their daughter before they finally overwhelmed her. "You stay close to me," he said finally. "You do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Clara nodded. "Understood. Then let's go." They rode down the mountain in silence, following paths that Silas knew like the lines of his own palms. The snow had packed down enough to make travel possible, though still treacherous in places. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through drifts too deep to ride. The landscape was beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, dangerous and indifferent. Pine forests gave way to open meadows, which gave way to more forest. Mountains rose on every side, their peaks lost in clouds. Clara found herself watching Silas as they rode. The way he sat, his horse relaxed but alert. The way his eyes constantly moved, scanning, assessing. The way his hand never strayed far from his weapon. This was a man who had lived with violence for so long that vigilance had become as natural as breathing. "Can I ask you something?" she said when they stopped to rest the horses. Silas glanced at her. "You can ask. Why didn't you leave after what happened to your family? You could have sold the land, gone somewhere else, started over." Silas was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Sarah and Lily are buried on that land," he said finally. "What's left of them anyway? I couldn't find Lily's body after the fire, but I buried a box of her things next to her mother, her doll, a dress she loved, a lock of her hair I'd kept since she was born." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I thought about leaving. God knows I thought about it. But every time I started packing, I'd think about them up there alone. And I couldn't do it." He looked at her then, and the raw honesty in his eyes took her breath away. Somewhere along the way, waiting stopped being about the land and started being about the answers. Who sent those men? Why did they want my family dead? What happened to my daughter? And you never found out. Never had proof. Only suspicions. His jaw tightened. Drake's name came up more than once, whispers, rumors, but nothing solid, and you can't kill a man on whispers. But now, Silas looked at her, now I have you, a witness, Someone who was inside his house. Someone who saw his documents. He paused. Someone who can help me finally understand what happened 15 years ago. Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her. She was not just a refugee anymore. She was the key to unlocking 15 years of buried truth. "Then let's get those answers," she said. They reached Pine Ridge as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. The town was larger than Clara had expected, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, a hotel, a saloon, a blacksmith, and at the far end, the impressive facade of Drake's mining company headquarters. But it was what she did not see that struck her most. There was no laughter in the streets, no children playing. The few people moving between buildings did so with their heads down, their shoulders hunched, like animals in a territory ruled by predators. "This is what Drake has done," Silas said quietly. 15 years ago, this was a good town. People helped each other, trusted each other. Now look at them. As they rode down the main street, faces appeared in windows. Eyes watched them from doorways. Clara felt the weight of attention, but no one approached. No one called out a greeting. They stopped in front of Brennan's general store, a solid building with the paint peeling around the windows. Silas dismounted and tied his horse, then helped Clara down. "Follow my lead," he said, "and watch the street." The interior of the store was warm and cluttered shelves packed with everything from flour to ammunition. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, white-haired but sharp-eyed, who looked up when they entered. His expression flickered through surprise, then recognition, then careful neutrality. "Silas Hawthorne," Thomas Brennan said. "Been 3 years since you came down from that mountain." "Thomas," Silas nodded. "We need to talk, in private." Brennan's eyes moved to Clara, then to the windows, then back to Silas. "Private is a luxury around here. Drake's got ears everywhere." "Then we'll be quick." Brennan hesitated. His gaze went to the street again, where 2 of Drake's men had already noticed the strange horses tied outside. "Back room," he said finally. "Make it fast." The back room was storage space crowded with crates and barrels. Brennan closed the door behind them and leaned against it, his arms crossed. "This is the girl everyone's looking for," he said. It was not a question. "Her name is Clara Morgan. I know who she is. Madsen's been spreading the word for a week. Says she stole documents from Drake. Says she's dangerous and unstable and should be brought in for her own protection." Brennan snorted. "Never mind that everyone who's seen those bruises knows exactly who the dangerous one is." Clara spoke for the first time. "I didn't steal anything. I ran for my life." "I believe you." Brennan's voice softened slightly. "I've known what Drake is since he first came to this valley, but knowing and proving are 2 different things." Silas stepped forward. "That's why we're here." Clara was inside Drake's house. She heard things, saw things, names, documents, proof of what he's been doing for years. Brennan's expression sharpened. "What kind of proof?" "Land deals," Clara said. "Forged documents, lists of people who were handled when they got in the way." She paused. "And children." The word hung in the air like a curse. "Children." Brennan's voice was barely a whisper. "There's a safe in Drake's office. I saw them open it once. Inside were files, photographs of children, names, dates, records of money received for delivery." Clara's voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "Drake isn't just stealing land. He's selling human beings, children who disappear and are never seen again." Brennan's face had gone pale. He leaned heavily against the door, suddenly looking all of his 65 years. "God in heaven." "I saw a name in one of those files," Clara said. She looked at Silas. "Lily Hawthorne. Date of delivery was 15 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. Silas stood frozen, every muscle in his body rigid. His face was expressionless, but Clara could see the storm behind his eyes. The 15 years of grief and rage and desperate hope that had just been validated and destroyed in the same breath. Lily was alive, or had been alive once, and Drake had sold her like livestock. "Are you sure?" Silas's voice was barely recognizable. "I'm sure." The file had a photograph. A little girl with amber-colored eyes. Clara touched his arm gently. "Your eyes." Brennan crossed himself, something he had not done in years. All this time, all these years. We knew Drake was bad, but this is why he wanted Clara dead, Silas said. His voice had steadied, but the fury beneath it was palpable. "She's the only witness, the only one who knows what's in that safe." "The files are still there," Clara said. "If we can get to them, we can prove everything. We can show the world what Drake really is." Brennan shook his head slowly. "Drake's house is a fortress. He's got men everywhere. You'd never make it through the door. That's why I need help." Silas looked at the old man directly. "How many people in this town want to see Drake gone?" "Want to, everyone. The question is, who's brave enough to do something about it? Find them. 5 men, 10. Enough to create a distraction while Clara and I get into that house." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "There are some. Harrison the blacksmith. His brother died in Drake's mine under suspicious circumstances. Murphy and the Foster brothers. They lost their ranch last year to forged papers. O'Brien, whose wife disappeared when she started asking too many questions. Can they fight? They can. Whether they will." Brennan sighed. "Drake's had this town under his boot for a long time. People are scared. They've seen what happens to those who resist." "Then show them that Drake can bleed," Silas said. "Show them that he's not invincible." "And how do you plan to do that?" Silas looked at Clara, then back at Brennan. "By making him come to me on my terms, on my mountain, where I know every tree and rock and shadow." His voice hardened. "And then by taking everything from him the way he took everything from me." Brennan studied Silas for a long moment. The scar on his face, the gray in his hair, the absolute certainty in his eyes. "You've been waiting for this," Brennan said. 15 years. "And her?" Brennan nodded toward Clara. "She's the reason I finally have a chance." Silas's voice softened slightly. "Drake made a mistake when he let her escape. He gave her to me, and I don't intend to waste the opportunity." Brennan was quiet. Then he extended his hand. "I'll talk to the others. No promises, but I'll try." Silas shook his hand. "That's all I ask." As they turned to leave, Brennan spoke again. "Be careful, Silas. Drake knows you're involved now. He'll be watching, and he doesn't fight fair." "Neither do I. Not anymore." They slipped out the back way, avoiding the main street where Drake's men were still watching the front of the store. The sun had set completely now, and the darkness gave them cover as they made their way to their horses. But they were not fast enough. Madsen was waiting for them. This time, he was not alone. 4 men with rifles stood in a loose semicircle around the alley entrance, and behind them, stepping out of the shadows like a spider emerging from its web, was Cornelius Drake himself. Clara had seen him before during her imprisonment, but seeing him in the lamplight with the full weight of his attention focused on her was different. He was not a large man, but he radiated power the way a fire radiates heat. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his clothes were expensive, his smile was the most terrifying thing about him. "Miss Morgan," he said pleasantly, "you've led us quite a chase." Silas moved to put himself between Clara and the men, his hand on his pistol. But he knew the math. 5 guns against 1. Even if he drew first, even if he killed Drake and Madsen, the others would cut him down before he could reload. "Drake," he said. "Ah, Mr. Hawthorne, the hermit of the mountain." Drake's smile widened. "I've been wondering when we'd finally meet face to face. I have to say you're exactly what I expected. Scarred, bitter, clinging to the past. And you're exactly what I expected, a coward who hides behind other men's guns." Drake's smile flickered just for a moment. Then it returned colder than before. "Bring them to my office. We have much to discuss." The walk through town was silent. Clara kept her head high, refusing to show fear, but her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Silas walked beside her. his hands bound in front of him, his face expressionless. They were led through the front doors of Drake's headquarters, up a flight of stairs, and into an office that looked more like a museum than a workplace. Paintings on the walls, leather furniture, a massive desk made of polished mahogany, and behind the desk, the safe. Clara's eyes went to it immediately. The safe where the evidence was kept. The safe that held proof of Drake's crimes. So close and yet impossibly far. Drake settled into the chair behind his desk as if he were receiving welcome guests rather than prisoners. He gestured for his men to stand back, leaving Silas and Clara in the center of the room. "Now," Drake said, "let's talk about how we're going to resolve this little situation." "There's nothing to talk about," Silas said. "On the contrary, there's a great deal." Drake leaned back. "You see, Miss Morgan knows things that could be very inconvenient for me. Names, documents, unfortunate details that would be difficult to explain if they became public. Then maybe they should become public. And that Mr. Hawthorne is why we're having this conversation." Drake's eyes moved to Silas with renewed interest. "I'm prepared to make you an offer, a generous one. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer." Drake laughed softly. "Everyone is interested in something. For most people it's money. For others, safety. But for you—" He paused, letting the moment stretch. "For you, I think it's something else entirely." He reached into his desk drawer and produced a photograph which he laid on the surface. Silas did not move, but Clara saw his entire body go rigid, saw the color drain from his face. The photograph showed a young woman, early 20s, with amber-colored eyes and dark hair. She was thin, pale, and there was something broken in her expression. But she was unmistakably Lily Hawthorne grown up. "She's alive," Drake said. "Your daughter. After all these years of wondering, hoping, torturing yourself with questions." He tapped the photograph. "She's alive. Living in Denver. Working for one of my business associates." Silas's voice came out as a rasp. "Where?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Drake smiled. "I can tell you where she is. I can even arrange for her safe return. All I need from you is cooperation." Clara watched Silas struggle, watched the war between rage and hope play out across his scarred face. She understood the impossible choice being presented to him, his daughter's life against everything else. "What kind of cooperation?" Silas asked. "Simple. You sign over the deed to your property. Miss Morgan signs an affidavit stating that she was confused and hysterical, that she never saw anything in my office, that she's grateful for my help in her recovery, and then you both disappear. California, Oregon. I don't care, as long as you never come back." "And if we refuse?" Drake's smile faded. "Then I send word to Denver tonight, and by tomorrow morning your daughter will have had a tragic accident, the kind that happens all too often to young women in her profession." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Clara felt sick. She had thought she understood the depths of Drake's cruelty, but this was something else entirely, using a man's own daughter as leverage, holding a child's life hostage for land and silence. "3 days," Drake said. "I'll give you 3 days to consider my offer. After that, my patience will expire. And so will Lily." He nodded to his men. "Escort them to the edge of town. And Mr. Hawthorne, don't do anything foolish. I have eyes everywhere." They were marched out of the building and through the streets, the townspeople watching from behind curtained windows. At the edge of town, their horses were returned to them, along with a final warning from Madsen. 3 days, old man, then we come for you." They rode in silence until the lights of Pine Ridge disappeared behind them. Then Silas pulled his horse to a stop and sat motionless, staring at the mountains. Clara rode up beside him. "Silas." He did not respond. "I know what you're thinking, and I understand, but if you give him what he wants—" "She's alive." His voice was raw. "My daughter is alive. For 15 years I thought she was dead. I buried an empty box and tried to make peace with never knowing, and now—" He looked at Clara, and she saw the tears he was fighting to hold back. "She's alive, and I can save her." Clara felt her own eyes burning. She wanted to tell him it was a trap, that Drake would never keep his word. That signing the papers and making it all go away was exactly what the monster wanted. But how could she? How could she ask a father to choose principles over his own child? "There's another way," she said. Silas looked at her. "The file's in the safe. If we can get them out, we can expose Drake to the whole country. The newspapers, the territorial government, even Washington. He'd have so many enemies coming at him that he couldn't hurt anyone." She reached out and touched his arm. "Including Lily. And how do we get into that safe?" "We just came from his office. You saw how many men he has." "I know the combination." Silas went still. "The night before I escaped, they brought me down to Drake's office. He wanted me to sign those papers. While he was threatening me, he opened the safe to show me what he had on other people who had refused him. I watched his fingers on the dial. The combination is his wife's birthday. March 15th, 1851. I know because Drake muttered it under his breath while opening the safe, cursing her name. He said something about how even dead she still controlled his secrets. A woman who died 10 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Clara's voice hardened. Probably because she knew too much, just like me. Silas stared at her for a long moment. The hope in his eyes was painful to see. "You're talking about breaking into the most fortified building in the territory." "Yes." "With guards everywhere." "Yes." "With a 3-day deadline hanging over our heads." "Yes." Silas looked back toward the distant glow of Pine Ridge. Then at the mountains that had been his home for 15 years. Then at Clara the stranger who had stumbled into his life and set everything in motion. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. Clara almost smiled. "Maybe both." Silas was quiet for a moment longer. Then he straightened in his saddle. "We need a plan, a distraction, someone to draw Drake's men away while we get inside." Brennan said there were people who wanted to help. Brennan said there were people who might want to help. That's not the same thing. Then we need to convince them. Clara's voice was firm. "Show them that Drake isn't invincible, that he can be beaten." Silas nodded slowly. "There's a back way into Drake's building, service entrance that used to be used for deliveries. If we could get Brennan's people to start a fire or cause some kind of disturbance at the front, then we slip in the back while everyone's distracted. Get the files. Get out." "It's insane. Do you have a better idea?" Silas did not answer, because they both knew he did not. The ride back to the cabin was tense with urgency. Every moment that passed was one less moment they had to save Lily. One less moment before Drake decided that waiting was not worth the risk. When they arrived, Silas went immediately to the window, checking the tree line by habit. Nothing moved in the darkness. "We need to move tonight," he said. "Tomorrow at the latest. If we wait until the 3rd day, Drake will be ready for us." Clara nodded. "I'll need a weapon, something small, in case things go wrong." Silas went to a chest in the corner and returned with a knife in a leather sheath. The blade was perhaps 4 inches long, curved and wickedly sharp. "You know how to use this?" Clara took the knife, tested its weight in her hand. "Not really." "Then I'll teach you." For the next 2 hours by lamplight, Silas taught Clara the basics of knife work. How to hold it, how to move with it, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to target the vulnerable spots that would end a fight quickly. Clara was a fast learner. Her hands, which had trembled so badly a week ago, were steady now. Her movements became more confident with each repetition. When they finally stopped, both of them were exhausted but wired with nervous energy. "Try to sleep," Silas said. "Tomorrow we'll make contact with Brennan. Set everything in motion." Clara nodded, but she did not move toward the bedroom. Instead, she stood by the fire staring into the flames. "Silas?" He turned. "If this doesn't work, if we fail and Drake wins—" She paused. "I want you to know that you already saved me. That night in the storm, you could have left me outside to die. You didn't. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for that." Silas crossed the room and stood in front of her, close enough to see the firelight reflected in her eyes, close enough to see the strength that had grown in her over the past week. "Sarah would have liked you," he said quietly. "My wife. She had the same fire in her, the same refusal to give up." Clara felt her breath catch. "We're not going to fail," Silas continued. "We're going to get those documents. We're going to expose Drake. And we're going to save my daughter." His voice hardened with certainty. "Because I have waited 15 years for this chance, and I am not going to waste it." He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was brief, almost awkward, but it carried a weight of emotion that words could not express. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we end this." Clara watched him walk to his chair by the fire, watched him settle into the position he had taken every night since she arrived, always between her and the door, always ready. She went to the bedroom and lay down, but sleep was a long time coming. Her mind raced with plans and contingencies, with fears and hopes, with the image of a young woman with amber eyes trapped in a hell of Drake's making. They would save her. They had to. Because if they failed, the monster would win. And Clara Morgan had not survived this long just to let evil triumph in the end. Outside, the wind picked up singing through the pines like a warning. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the moon. And in the darkness of Pine Ridge, Cornelius Drake sat at his desk, staring at the photograph of Lily Hawthorne with a smile that had nothing of humanity in it. 3 days, he murmured to himself. "Let's see what you're made of, old man." He returned the photograph to its drawer and poured himself a whiskey. The game was in motion, and Drake always won his games, or so he believed. The message reached Thomas Brennan through a boy who delivered firewood. A single piece of paper folded small tucked beneath the kindling. 3 words in Silas's careful handwriting. "Tonight, back door." Brennan burned the note after reading it and spent the rest of the day preparing. By nightfall he had spoken to 5 men. Harrison the blacksmith whose brother had died in Drake's mine, Murphy the farmer whose land had been stolen, the Foster brothers James and William who had lost everything to forged documents, and O'Brien whose wife had vanished 3 years ago after she started asking questions about Drake's business dealings. 5 men. Not an army, but perhaps enough. They gathered in the back room of Brennan's store after the town had gone quiet, their faces grim in the lamplight. "You all know why we're here," Brennan said. "Silas Hawthorne is going after Drake tonight. He needs a distraction." "Hawthorne's crazy," Murphy muttered. "Drake's got 20 men, maybe more." "Drake's got documents in his safe that prove everything he's done," Brennan replied. "Land theft, murder, and worse." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "He's been selling children." The silence that followed was absolute. "What?" Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. "The girl who escaped Clara Morgan. She saw the files. Names, photographs, records of money received. Children who disappeared and were shipped off to God knows where." Brennan's voice hardened. "Including Silas's daughter. Lily Hawthorne didn't die 15 years ago. She was sold." O'Brien's face had gone pale. "My wife. She was investigating disappearances. Children who went missing from the mining camps. She said she was getting close to something and then she vanished too," Brennan finished. "Maybe now we know why." The men looked at each other. Fear was still there, etched into their faces, but something else was growing alongside it. Something that looked like fury. "What do you need us to do?" James Foster asked. "The old warehouse on Miller Street. The one that's been empty since the fire 2 years ago. I need you to set it ablaze. Make it big enough that every man Drake has will run to fight it." "That's arson," Murphy said. "That building belongs to Drake," Brennan replied. "Everything in this town belongs to Drake. I'd call it justice." The men exchanged glances. Then Harrison nodded slowly. "I'm in." "Me too," said O'Brien. One by one the others agreed. By the time the meeting ended, the plan was set. Midnight. The warehouse. Fire bright enough to light up the whole town. and while Drake's men ran to fight flames, Silas and Clara would slip through the shadows and into the devil's lair. The clock in Brennan's store struck 11. 1 hour remained. Silas and Clara waited in the darkness behind Drake's headquarters, pressed against the cold brick wall of an adjacent building. The night was clear and bitter, the stars brilliant overhead. In other circumstances, it might have been beautiful. "You remember the combination," Silas whispered. "March 15th, 1851, his wife's birthday." Clara's voice was steady. "I remember. Once we're inside, we move fast. Get the documents, get out. No confrontations if we can avoid them." "And if we can't avoid them?" Silas's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. "Then we do what we have to do." They waited in silence, watching the guards patrol. 2 men walked the perimeter every 15 minutes, their lanterns casting pools of light that swung and swayed with each step. The back door was unguarded during the brief window when both men were at the front of the building. 30 seconds. That was all they would have. The distant clock began to chime midnight. And as if on cue, the sky to the south erupted in orange light. The warehouse was burning. Shouts echoed through the streets. The guards at the front of Drake's building hesitated, looked at each other, then ran toward the flames. Within moments, the night was chaos. People pouring out of buildings, bucket brigades forming, horses screaming. "Now," Silas said. They moved fast, crossing the open ground to the back door. Silas tried the handle. Locked. He pulled a set of picks from his pocket tools he had not used in years but had never forgotten how to use. 30 seconds of delicate work, and the lock clicked open. They slipped inside. The back hallway was dark and quiet, the sounds of the fire muffled by thick walls. Clara led the way, her memory of the building's layout guiding them through the shadows. Left at the first junction, up the stairs, second door on the right, Drake's office. The door was unlocked. They entered quickly, closing it behind them. The room was exactly as Clara remembered. Paintings, leather furniture, the massive desk, and behind the desk, the safe. Clara crossed to it, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the combination dial. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus. March 15th, 1851. 3, 1, 5, 1, 8, 5, 1. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside were stacks of files exactly as she remembered. She grabbed them without looking, shoving papers into the bag Silas had brought. Names, photographs, financial records, all the proof they needed. And there near the bottom, a file with a name that made her heart clench. Lily Hawthorne. Date of delivery, October 12, 1864. Destination Denver. Current status active. She pulled it out and handed it to Silas. He looked at it for a long moment, his face unreadable in the darkness. "She's alive," he whispered. "The address is here, where she's being held." "Then we have everything we need. Let's go." They turned toward the door, and the lights came on. Cornelius Drake stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. Behind him, Madsen and 4 more armed men filled the hallway. "I must admit," Drake said pleasantly, "I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd actually try it." Silas stepped in front of Clara, his hand moving toward his gun, but 4 rifles were already aimed at his chest. "Don't," Drake said. "I'd rather not kill you yet." "There's still so much to discuss." "How did you know?" Clara's voice was hollow. Drake smiled. "Murphy, the farmer you thought was your ally. He's been on my payroll for 3 years. The moment Brennan started recruiting, I knew exactly what you were planning." Murphy, the man who had sat in that back room and agreed to help, who had shaken hands with the others and promised to do his part. They had been betrayed from the beginning. "The fire was a nice touch," Drake continued. "Very dramatic. But while my men were pretending to fight flames, others were waiting for you here. You walked into a trap of your own making." He stepped aside and more men pushed into the room. Among them, his face bruised and his hands bound, was Thomas Brennan. "Your friend tried to warn you," Drake said. "Unfortunately, he didn't get very far." Brennan looked at Silas with anguish in his eyes. "I'm sorry. Murphy sold us out. I didn't know until it was too late." "It's not your fault," Silas said. His voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in every line of his body, the coiled readiness of a man preparing for violence. "Now," Drake said, gesturing toward the bag Clara held, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." One of his men stepped forward and ripped the bag from her hands. He dumped the contents on the desk, spreading the files and photographs across the surface. Drake's smile faded as he looked at the evidence of his own crimes laid bare. "This is unfortunate," he said quietly. "I had hoped to resolve this more cleanly, but you forced my hand." He nodded to Madsen. "Kill them. Make it look like they were caught breaking in. Brennan, too. His store can burn down with him inside. Another tragic accident." Clara felt fear grip her heart. This was it. This was how it ended, in a dark office surrounded by enemies with no hope of escape. But Silas was not afraid. He was calculating. "Before you kill us," he said, his voice steady, "there's something you should know." Drake raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" "Those documents aren't the only copies." Drake's smile flickered. "Clara spent 3 weeks in your house," Silas continued. 3 weeks with access to your files. You really think she only looked at them once?" He shook his head slowly. "She wrote down everything she saw, names, dates, addresses. I gave those notes to a man on his way to Helena yesterday. If I don't meet him by noon tomorrow, he'll deliver them to the territorial governor and to every newspaper west of the Mississippi." It was a lie, a desperate bluff. But Drake did not know that. "You're bluffing," Drake said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" "You're a careful man, Drake. You cover your tracks, hide your crimes, make sure no witness survives. But you made a mistake when you let Clara live long enough to escape. She saw everything, and now whether you kill us or not, that information is out there, waiting." Drake's face had gone pale. His grip on his pistol tightened. "Who did you send?" he demanded. "Give me the name and maybe I'll let you live. Kill me and you'll never know." The standoff stretched seconds, feeling like hours. Clara could hear her own heartbeat loud in the silence. Then Brennan moved. Despite his bound hands, despite his age, the old man launched himself at Drake with a fury born of decades of oppression. He caught Drake off guard, slamming into him, driving them both to the floor. "Run!" Brennan shouted. "Get out of here!" Chaos erupted. Madsen raised his rifle, but Silas was already moving faster than a man his age had any right to move. He grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the window. A shot rang out. Glass shattered. Cold air rushed in. Silas shoved Clara through the broken window onto the roof of the adjacent building. He turned to follow, and that's when he saw it. Brennan on the ground, blood spreading from his chest. Drake standing over him, pistol smoking. Their eyes met. Silas and Drake. 15 years of hatred compressed into a single moment. "This isn't over," Drake snarled. "No," Silas agreed. "It isn't." Then he threw himself through the window after Clara. They ran across rooftops, dropped into alleys, disappeared into the darkness while shouts echoed behind them. The fire at the warehouse was still burning, providing chaos and confusion that covered their escape. They reached their horses hidden in a grove outside town. Silas was breathing hard, his shoulder bleeding where a bullet had grazed him during their escape. But he was alive. Clara was alive. And somewhere behind them, Thomas Brennan was dying. They rode hard through the night, putting miles between themselves and Pine Ridge. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Clara slid from her saddle and stood trembling in the cold dawn air. "Brennan," she said, "he sacrificed himself for us." "I know." Silas's voice was heavy with grief and guilt. "He knew what he was doing when he charged Drake. He gave us the chance to escape. It's my fault. If I hadn't been caught, if I hadn't led us into that trap—" "No." Silas turned to face her. "This is Drake's fault. Drake and Murphy and every coward who lets evil men win because standing up is too hard." His jaw tightened. "Thomas Brennan died a hero. That's more than most men can say." Clara wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "What do we do now?" We lost the documents. Drake knows we tried to expose him. He'll come after us with everything he has." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the file on Lily Hawthorne. "I grabbed it before we jumped," he said. "The address in Denver, where my daughter is being held." Clara stared at the paper. "But the rest of the evidence is still in Drake's safe. But now he's scared. He doesn't know if my bluff was real or not. He'll spend the next few days trying to find out who I supposedly sent to Helena." Silas allowed himself a grim smile. "That buys us time." "Time for what?" "To rally the people who ran. Harrison, the Fosters, O'Brien. They saw what happened. They know Murphy betrayed them, but they also know that Drake can be hurt, that his fortress can be penetrated." Silas looked toward the mountains. "Men who've been scared their whole lives sometimes find courage when they see that monsters can bleed. And if they don't, if they're too afraid to fight, then we fight alone." His voice was quiet but absolute. "Because I am done waiting. I am done hiding on that mountain while the man who destroyed my family lives like a king. Whatever happens next, I will not stop until Drake pays for everything he's done." Clara looked at the man beside her, the scars on his face, the gray in his hair, the fire in his eyes that 15 years of solitude had not dimmed. "We fight together," she said. "Whatever happens." Silas nodded slowly. "Together." They returned to the cabin as the sun rose over the mountains. Silas tended his wounded shoulder while Clara made coffee, both of them moving on automatic, their minds churning with plans and contingencies. Around midday they heard hoofbeats approaching. Silas grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Clara took position by the back door, the knife Silas had given her clutched in her hand. But the riders were not enemies. Harrison the blacksmith rode at the front, followed by the Foster brothers and O'Brien. Behind them came others, men and women from Pine Ridge. 10, 15, 20 people armed with whatever weapons they could find. Silas stepped onto the porch as they approached. Harrison dismounted and walked forward. His face was hard, but his eyes were alive with something that had not been there before. "Brennan's dead," he said. "Drake killed him in his own office. But before he died, he got word out to us, told us what you found, what Drake's really been doing." "I'm sorry," Silas said. "Thomas was a good man." "He was." Harrison looked back at the group behind him. "When word spread about what happened about the children Drake has been selling, about the families he's destroyed, people started talking, really talking, for the first time in years." One of the Foster brothers stepped forward. "Murphy's dead. O'Brien shot him when we found out he was the traitor. No trial, just justice." "And Drake?" Silas asked. "Holed up in his headquarters with all his men. He knows something's changed. The town isn't afraid of him anymore. They're angry." Harrison met Silas's eyes. "We came to fight. Tell us what to do." Silas looked at the crowd before him. Farmers, shopkeepers, miners, ordinary people who had lived under Drake's boot for years, who had watched their neighbors disappear, who had kept their heads down and their mouths shut because survival demanded it. And now they were here, ready to risk everything. "Drake has maybe 25 men," Silas said, "professional killers, but he's trapped in that building and he knows the whole town has turned against him. If he tries to run, he'll have to fight his way out." "So we surround him," Harrison said. "Cut off his escape." "No, we give him one chance to surrender, to face trial for his crimes." Silas's voice hardened. "And when he refuses, we burn him out." The plan came together over the next few hours. Armed townspeople would surround Drake's headquarters from all sides, blocking every exit. Silas would approach under a flag of truce and demand surrender. If Drake refused, they would set fire to the building just as they had burned the warehouse. This time there would be no distraction. This time Drake would have nowhere to run. They rode for Pine Ridge as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. The column of armed citizens stretched back along the road, grim-faced but determined. Word had spread through the territory. Other towns were sending men. By the time they reached Pine Ridge, their numbers had swelled to nearly 50, against Drake's 25. The odds had finally shifted. Drake's headquarters was a fortress, but even fortresses could fall. The townspeople spread out, taking positions behind water troughs and wagons and buildings. Rifle barrels glinted in the fading light. Silas walked forward alone, a white handkerchief tied to the barrel of his rifle. "Drake." His voice echoed off the buildings. "Come out and talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a window on the second floor opened and Drake's face appeared. "Hawthorne, I see you've brought friends." "It's over, Drake. The whole territory knows what you've done. There's nowhere to run." "Run?" Drake laughed. "Why would I run? I built this town. I own this town. These people wouldn't exist without me. These people are the ones pointing guns at your building." Drake's smile faded slightly. His eyes moved across the crowd surrounding his headquarters, the shopkeepers, the miners, the farmers, the wives and daughters of men he had cheated and killed. "What do you want, Hawthorne? Surrender. Come out with your hands up. Face trial for your crimes." "And if I don't?" Silas's voice was cold. "Then we burn you out, the same way you burned my family 15 years ago." The silence stretched. Drake stared down at Silas, his face a mask of calculation. "You know," Drake said finally, "I always wondered if you suspected me. After your wife and daughter died, after I made you those offers for your land, I watched you up on that mountain, year after year alone with your grief. I thought you'd break eventually, sell me the land and disappear. You were wrong. I can see that now." Drake's eyes narrowed. "But you're wrong too if you think I'll just surrender. I've spent 15 years building my empire. Do you really think I'll let a mob of farmers tear it down? You don't have a choice." Drake smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Silas had ever seen. "There's always a choice." He disappeared from the window. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the front doors of the building burst open and Drake's men poured out, guns blazing. Chaos erupted. Bullets flew in both directions. Men screamed and fell. Silas dove for cover behind a water trough, returning fire as fast as he could work the action of his rifle. Clara was beside him, the small pistol Silas had given her clutched in both hands. She fired at a man charging toward them, saw him fall, felt nothing but grim satisfaction. The battle was brutal and brief. Drake's men were professionals, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. One by one they fell. Some surrendered, some tried to run and were cut down. Some fought to the last bullet. Within 15 minutes it was over. 23 of Drake's men lay dead or wounded. 8 townspeople had fallen. The street was thick with smoke and the smell of blood, but Drake himself was nowhere to be found. "Where is he?" Silas demanded, grabbing a surrendered gunman by the collar. "Where did Drake go?" The man's face was pale with fear. "Tunnel. There's a tunnel under the building. Comes out near the church." Silas dropped him and ran. Clara followed her legs, burning with exhaustion, but her determination absolute. The church was 100 yards away. They reached it just as Drake emerged from behind the building, his horse already saddled, his saddlebags bulging with what was probably gold and cash. "Drake!" The man turned. For a moment they faced each other, the mountain man and the monster. 15 years of hatred and grief distilled into a single confrontation. Drake raised his pistol. Silas raised his rifle. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Drake's bullet whistled past Silas's ear. Silas's bullet took Drake in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol flew from his hand, but Drake did not fall. He grabbed the saddle horn with his good arm and tried to pull himself onto the horse. Silas crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He grabbed Drake by the collar and threw him to the ground. "This is for Sarah," he said, driving his fist into Drake's face. "This is for Lily." Another blow. "This is for every family you destroyed." He drew his pistol and pressed it against Drake's forehead. "Do it!" Drake spat blood streaming from his broken nose. "Pull the trigger. Become a murderer just like me." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to fire, to end it, to finally have his revenge. But then he felt a hand on his arm. Clara. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not in cold blood. He killed my wife. He sold my daughter. And he'll hang for it. The whole territory knows what he's done. He'll face trial, and he'll face justice." Her voice softened. "But if you execute him here, you become the killer they said you were. You prove every lie he ever told about you." Silas stared down at Drake, at the man who had haunted his nightmares for 15 years, at the monster who had taken everything from him, and slowly, painfully, he lowered the gun. "Take him," he said to the townspeople who had gathered around them. "Lock him up, and send word to Helena. We have a prisoner for trial." Drake laughed weakly as they dragged him away. "You think this is over, Hawthorne? You think I'm the only one? There are men in Washington, men with more power than you can imagine, who won't let this stand." "Then they'll come," Silas said, "and we'll be ready." He turned away from the man who had destroyed his life and looked at Clara. She was covered in dust and smoke, her face pale with exhaustion, but she was alive. They both were. "It's over," she said. "Not quite." Silas pulled the folded paper from his pocket, the file on Lily Hawthorne. "There's still one more thing to do." The trial took place 3 weeks later in Helena. Cornelius Drake was charged with murder, kidnapping, fraud, and human trafficking. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The testimony of Clara Morgan, the files recovered from his safe, the witnesses who came forward once they knew it was safe. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to hang. But by the time the sentence was carried out, Silas was not there to see it. He was in Denver. The building on Maple Street looked like any other boarding house from the outside. But Silas knew better. He had spent 3 days watching it, learning the patterns of the guards, mapping the exits and entrances. Tonight he would finally see his daughter. Clara insisted on coming. He had tried to talk her out of it, but she was stubborn in ways that reminded him more of Sarah every day. They went in through a second-floor window after midnight. 2 guards were neutralized quietly. And then Silas was standing in a narrow hallway facing a row of locked doors. Behind one of them was Lily. He found her in the 4th room, a small space with a narrow bed and barred windows. She was sitting on the bed, her back against the wall, her eyes empty. She was thin, pale, 23 years old, but she looked older. The years had not been kind, but she had Sarah's eyes, amber-colored like autumn leaves, eyes that Silas had never stopped seeing in his dreams. "Lily." She flinched at his voice, looked up at him with the wariness of a wounded animal. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Silas knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his scarred face. "I'm your father. I'm Silas Hawthorne." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. "I've been looking for you for 15 years. She stared at him, at the scar on his cheek, at the gray in his hair, at the tears he could not stop. "Papa." The word was uncertain, almost disbelieving. "They told me you were dead. They said you died in the fire. They lied." Silas's voice broke. "They lied about everything. But I never stopped looking. I never stopped hoping." Lily's eyes filled with tears. Slowly trembling, she reached out and touched his face, traced the scar that ran from temple to cheek. "I remember this," she whispered. "I remember when it happened. You were fighting them, and one of them had a knife, and you were screaming for me to run. I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, Silas knew. Sorry for not saving her. Sorry for not finding her sooner. Sorry for every day she had spent in hell while he sat on his mountain grieving a daughter he thought was dead. "I'm sorry," he said again. Lily threw herself into his arms. They held each other for a long time, father and daughter reunited after 15 years of darkness. When they finally pulled apart, Lily's eyes went to Clara, who stood quietly by the door. "Who is she?" "Her name is Clara. She's the one who found the evidence against the men who took you. She's the reason I finally learned the truth." Lily looked at Clara. Something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition of shared trauma. "Thank you," Lily said softly. Clara shook her head. Your father saved me first. I just returned the favor." They left Denver that night, the three of them riding north toward Montana. The journey took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of slow healing, of Lily learning to sleep without nightmares, of Silas learning to believe that miracles sometimes happened even for men who had stopped hoping, and of Clara discovering that the empty space in her heart was slowly filling with something she had never expected to find. They reached the cabin on a crisp autumn morning, the mountains blazing with color under a cloudless sky. Lily stood in the doorway looking at the home her father had built in the years after losing her. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's yours," Silas replied. "Yours and ours, for as long as you want it." That first night they sat around the fire, the three of them. Lily talked about her years in captivity, the words coming slowly at first, then faster, as she realized she was finally safe. Clara shared her own story. Silas listened to both his heartbreaking and healing with every word. Later, when Lily had gone to bed, Silas and Clara sat alone by the dying fire. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we heal, all of us." "And after?" Silas looked at her. The woman who had stumbled into his life on a night when he had given up hoping, who had given him the key to his daughter's prison, who had fought beside him, bled beside him, faced death beside him. "After is whatever you want it to be," he said. "You can go back east, start over somewhere Drake's shadow never reached, find a normal life with a normal man." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she moved closer to him on the bench. "And if I don't want a normal life, if I want this?" She gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the stars visible through the window. "If I want to stay here with you and Lily." Silas felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen for 15 years beginning to thaw. "I'm an old man," he said quietly. "Too many scars, too much history. I know. People will talk. A man your father's age with a woman young enough to be his daughter. I don't care what people say. I stopped caring about that the night I ran into a blizzard rather than let monsters decide my fate." She reached out and touched his face, the scar that marked him, the lines that years of grief had carved. "You saved my life, Silas Hawthorne. Not just my body, my life. You gave me back my future. Let me share it with you." Silas looked at her for a long moment, at the firelight reflected in her storm-colored eyes, at the strength that had grown from the ashes of her trauma, at the woman she had become in the weeks since she had knocked on his door. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. Clara smiled. "Maybe both." And then she kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Silas was smiling. For the first time in 15 years, it reached his eyes. "Maybe both," he agreed. 6 months later, they stood before a judge in Helena and made it official. Clara Hawthorne. The name felt right on her lips, like coming home to a place she had never been but had always belonged. Lily stood beside them, healthier now, the color returning to her cheeks. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less often. She had begun to laugh again, to smile, to speak without flinching. Healing was slow, but it was happening. The news from the outside world arrived in pieces. Drake had been hanged, his empire dismantled. The children he had sold were being tracked down, returned to families, when possible placed in good homes, when not. The men in Washington that Drake had boasted about turned out to be more vulnerable than they had appeared. When faced with exposure, they fled rather than fight. The network was broken. The monster was dead, and the shadow that had hung over Montana for 15 years was finally lifting. One evening, a letter arrived from Helena. Silas read it by lamplight, then handed it to Clara. "The territorial governor wants to name me to a position," he said. "Some kind of commission on land rights and criminal justice, helping make sure what Drake did can never happen again." Clara looked at the letter, then at Silas. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay on this mountain with my family, build a life that doesn't involve fighting monsters. But someone has to make sure there are no more Drakes. Someone who knows what he was capable of." He sighed. "Thomas Brennan died so we could win. Maybe the best way to honor him is to make sure his death meant something. Clara set down the letter and moved to sit beside him. Then we do both. We build our life here, but we don't hide from the world. We make it better a little at a time. Silas put his arm around her. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, carrying the promise of winter. "Have I told you lately that you're either very brave or very foolish?" Clara laughed and leaned into him. "Maybe both. Definitely both." They sat together as the fire burned low, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built something worth living for. The story of Silas Hawthorne and Clara Morgan would be told for years in Montana. How a stranger arrived in a storm. How an old man found the strength to fight. How a monster fell and a family rose from the ashes of tragedy. But for Silas, the story was simpler than that. It was the story of a man who had lost everything and found it again, who had waited 15 years for justice and finally received it, who had opened his door on the worst night of his life and discovered that sometimes in the midst of the deepest darkness, light arrives unexpectedly, and all you have to do is let it in. The mountains of Montana remember them still. The cabin on the ridge. The 3 graves in the meadow where Sarah and Thomas Brennan rest beside an empty box that once held a little girl's belongings. The family that grew from tragedy, that refused to let evil win. Some stories end with fire and blood. This one ends with healing and hope, because sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. And if you're watching this now, whoever you are, wherever you are, let me leave you with this. It's never too late to fight back, to start over, to open your door to a stranger in a storm, to choose love over fear, hope over despair, courage over comfort. Silas Hawthorne waited 15 years for his chance at redemption. Don't wait that long. Your moment might be closer than you think. If this story meant something to you, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Leave a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Because one honest choice turned a grieving hermit into a husband and father again. One decision to help a stranger changed everything. And it's never too late to choose a better way forward.